the day of the Lord. Verse 1, it begins, Behold, days of the Lord come, and your spoils shall be divided among you. Interesting verse. It starts off with days, but later we'll see it's talking about a specific day that things are going to happen. But a day of the Lord. The Lord, of course, is the Lord of every day, but when it sets it apart, here something special is going to happen, as we'll find out. And your spoils shall be divided among you. Who is the your and you? I'm not sure. I know as far as the usage of the word spoil, skila, 4661, they are things that are taken from one person or country or tribe from another by war, conquest, violence, revolution, some sort, and they take all of the belongings, the material goods of the people that were vanquished. Jesus talks about that in the New Testament, the only place the word appears, and it says in Luke 11:22, Jesus says, But when the stronger one, that would be Jesus, then he, the weak one, who I believe is the devil, in coming, should overtake him, the weak one, the devil. He, the stronger one, takes his, the weak one's, full armor, upon which he, the weak one, Satan, yields. And he, Jesus, the strong one, distributes his, the weak person's spoils. And I believe Jesus was talking about how when he comes, he defeats the works of Satan, because they called him Beelzebub, the ruler of the devil. So this was his response to them. Verse 2, it continues, And I will assemble all the nations against Jerusalem for battle, and the city shall be captured, and the houses shall be plundered, and the women shall be tainted, and shall come forth half the city in captivity, and the rest of my people in no way should be utterly destroyed from the city. I will assemble all the nations against Jerusalem. Jesus, when he was there, in Matthew 23:37, said about Jerusalem, 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 the one killing the prophets and stoning the ones sent to her. How often I wanted to assemble your children, in which manner a hen assembles her nestlings under the wings, and you wanted not. And then in Matthew 24:31, Jesus says, And he shall send his angels with a trumpet of great sound, and they shall assemble his chosen from out of the four winds, from the tips of the heavens unto their tips. So the assemblage of the people, I will assemble, here are all nations, but the assemblage of the believers also. In 2 Thessalonians 2:1, Paul says, Now we ask you, brothers, concerning the arrival of our Lord Jesus Christ and our assemblage unto him. And you can read about what that's all about, 2 Thessalonians 2:1. Now it says, And I will assemble all the nations against Jerusalem for battle. Now, Jerusalem had already been taken by Nebuchadnezzar, so Zechariah is talking about a future time that he sees Jerusalem being captured, and all these things are going to happen. Now, trying to figure out what time this is a little chore. I'll go through what I have come up with. And first is the city of the temple in the last 9 chapters of the book of Ezekiel 30. It doesn't say anything about Jerusalem. So whether or not that's Jerusalem or not, if it's talking about a later time, I don't believe so. And then in the book of Revelation, I put together a little chart here. the cities in Revelation. No place in the book of Revelation does it mention Jerusalem, the city. Talks about the New Jerusalem, the only word that Jerusalem appears. But we'll go through this as I see it. So the cities in Revelation in 3:12, and I will write upon him the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, of the New Jerusalem, which comes down from out of the heaven from my God, and my new name. And that's the overcomer. And then in Revelation 21:2, it says, and the holy city, New Jerusalem, I saw coming down from out of heaven. So again, comes down from heaven. Then in Revelation 21:10-23, you can go there and read all of that, but basically it's the man is shown, John is shown from a great and high mountain, verse 10, of the coming down of New Jerusalem from heaven. And it has a wall with 12 foundations, with the names of the 12 apostles, with gatehouses, in verse 14. And the city has a wall, and he measured the city and the gatehouses. In verse 15, we find out it's a cube of 12,000 stadiums, wide, high, and breadth. Verse 16, the wall is of jasper, and the city is of pure gold. Verse 18, the foundations of the wall are adorned with every precious stone. In verse 19, and it has 12 gatehouses of pearl. Each gatehouse is one pearl, and the square of the city is pure gold. Verse 21, and there's no sun or moon shining, but the glory of God gives her light, and the lamp is the Lamb. In verse 23. And then it continues and says in Revelation 22:14, blessed are the ones observing his commandments, that their authority will be unto the tree of life, and by the gatehouses they should enter into the city. So apparently there is going to be a back and forth from the city, possibly from Mount Meron, where the temple is built at the time in the last 9 chapters of Ezekiel. In Revelations 22:19, it says, and if anyone should remove from the words of the scroll of this prophecy, may God remove his part from the tree of life and for the holy city of the things having been written in this scroll. The things in this book of Revelation, now we see the New Jerusalem. Now what about other cities? Well, we have the holy city mentioned, a great city, the city being loved with the holy ones, Babylon, and the woman. So we'll go through these. The city. And it says, and the wine vat was trodden outside the city. And I didn't put down where that was, but it's there in Revelation. And then in Revelation 11:2 it says, and in the holy city, and they shall tread the holy city 42 months, 3.5 years. So now, the city and what's going on back in Zechariah, trying to figure out when it is. And it could be Rome, because it says in Luke 21:20, Jesus says, and whenever you should behold Jerusalem being encircled by encamped armies, then know that her desolation approaches. Now, Rome did come and took the city in 70 AD. Now, he may be talking about another time, but I'm thinking it's Rome. And then in Luke 21:24, it says, and Jerusalem will be for treading by nations until the times of the nations be fulfilled. So the city was tread by Rome, and then the Jews didn't come back until 1948. And then it says in Revelation, and the outer courtyard of the temple put out, and do not measure it, for it was given to the nations, and they shall tread the holy city for 42 months. So the city here, now we'll go back up to where we're at, the holy city and the city. Then I believe, and there's a great city, which I believe is none other than Babylon. It talks about it, and I'll show you where I can equate the two, or the Bible equates them. In Revelation 11:8, it says of the two prophets in Jerusalem who were killed, and their corpses will be upon the square of the great city, which is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt, where even their Lord was crucified. So that means Jerusalem. So this great city is Jerusalem, because where the Lord was crucified. But then it says in 11:13, and in that day a great earthquake took place, and a tenth of the city fell. So that's still part of the this part here with the corpses. And then in 16:19 it says, and the great city became into three parts. And Babylon was remembered before God to give to her the cup of the wine of the rage of his wrath. So there it's tied, the great city is tied into Babylon. In that day, a great earthquake, the great city here in 11:8, the square of the great city. And so it says it was Babylon, because it's the great city. The strong city is also Babylon. Revelation 18:10, it says, woe, woe to the great city, Babylon, the strong city. So the strong city, the great city, Babylon, Jerusalem, all tied together. For in 1 hour your judgment came. So it's going to be destroyed. Then the great city, Babylon, we had these other places where it was the great city. I hope you're following all this. It's very interesting. And it says, and the great city became into three parts. And Babylon the great was remembered before God to give to her the cup of the wine of the rage of his wrath. So Babylon, the great city, and Jerusalem. And then 18:10, woe, woe to the great city Babylon, the strong city, for in 1 hour your judgment came. The great city is Babylon. Woe, woe, in 18:16, woe, woe to the great city, the one wearing fine linen. And then 18:18, what is likened to the great city? And 19, woe, woe, the great city in which were enriched all the ones having ships in the sea, and from her valuables. So Jerusalem. 18:21, thus with impulse shall Babylon, the great city, be thrown, and in no way shall be found any more. So eventually Jerusalem will be destroyed. Then it's called the city being loved is another city, and that's in Revelation 20, verse 9. It says, and they ascended upon the width of the earth, and encircled the camp of the holy ones in the city being loved, which I believe is Jerusalem. At that time, a fire came down from heaven from God and devoured them. Then we have the great harlot of Revelation 17, which is Jerusalem, Babylon. Because it says in verse 1, it's a great harlot sitting on many waters. And in verse 2, she commits harlotry with all the kings of the earth. In verse 3, she sits on a scarlet wild beast with 7 heads and 10 horns of the beast. Verse 3. And then she wears purple, scarlet, gold, precious stone, pearls, golden cups of the abomination, in verse 4. And it's called Mystery Babylon, mother of harlots, written on her head in verse 5, and she's intoxicated with blood of holy ones in verse 6. So that Babylon and the great harlot is a city, and I believe it's none other than Jerusalem. And then it continues and says, 7 heads are 7 mountains where the woman sits upon them. And that's verse 9. The 10 kingdoms will detest the harlot in verse 16. In verse 18 says, and the woman whom you saw is the great city. See, the great city. So that is Jerusalem, Babylon, having kingship over all the earth. So now, going back to verse 2, it says, "And I will assemble all the nations against Jerusalem for battle. And the city shall be captured, and the houses shall be plundered, and the women tainted, and half the city goes into captivity, and the rest of my people in no way should be utterly destroyed from the city." And I mentioned how it was measured out, and part of the city was given to the nations in Revelation. So Rome, it's a possibility. It's talking about that time, but it says all the nations. I will assemble all the nations. Well, they weren't assembled with Rome. It was only Rome. So that's my guess, is that's not Rome. So could be today, where all the nations are going to come against Jerusalem, because it looks like that could possibly happen with all the Muslim nations at least, and that could be something that's similar to what happens in Ezekiel 38 and 39, where this army that invades and so forth. You can read Ezekiel 38 and 39 about that. But whether this is going to happen now, it's another possibility. I'm bringing these up. I'm not saying any one is correct. The next one is before the city, before the 1,000 years, and then after the 1,000 years. Now here we see in Revelation 19:19-21, it says, "And I saw the wild beast and the kings of the earth and their militaries being gathered together to make war with the one sitting upon the horse and with his military. And the wild beast was laid hold of." Now this is the wild beast was in Revelation with the woman tied into her. And with this one, the false prophet, performing the signs before him, in which he misled the ones receiving the imprint of the wild beast, and the ones doing obeisance to his image. And the two were thrown living into the lake of fire burning with sulfur, and the rest were killed by the broadsword of the one sitting upon the horse, by the one going forth from out of his mouth, and all the birds were filled from their flesh. So this giant war here could be what it's referring to in Zechariah. And then Satan is bound for 1,000 years. 1,000-year reign goes on. And then we get down here to verse 7 of 20, and it says, "And whenever the 1,000 years should be fulfilled, Satan will be loosed from out of his prison, and will come forth to mislead the nations in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog." And this is what's mentioned, Gog and Magog, in chapter 38 and 39 of Ezekiel. So that Ezekiel could be referring to two times, could be referring to just the one time here after the 1,000 years. I guess you could look at it different ways. And then it's to gather them together for the war, which is the number is as the sand of the sea. So another giant battle after the 1,000 years. And they ascended upon the width of the earth and encircled the camp of the holy ones. And this was mentioned about the city of the holy ones, and the city being loved, which would probably be Jerusalem. And fire came down from out of the heaven from God, and it devoured them. So all of this relating to the city shall be captured and shall be houses shall be plundered, the women shall be tainted, and come forth half the city in captivity, and the rest of my people in no way should be utterly destroyed from the city. The next section is a war against the nations attacking Jerusalem.